How would you like to learn leadership skills from a leader at Amazon? And not just any leader, we've got Joanna, who is the strategy lead of the whole of Europe, Middle East, and Africa for Amazon Web Services. Before leading the whole of EMEA, she was at Amazon in UK and Ireland. Before that, she was a leader at LinkedIn, EY, UK Parliament, London Mayor. You name it, she's probably been a leader there. Joanna is an absolute boss of a person. I had the privilege of knowing her in my time at EY as well. You're in for a great session because she's going to reveal all about how her leadership skills has evolved over time, how she's able to adapt in her growing responsibilities and be recognized as a high-performing leader within Amazon. Not only that, but she also shares two important methods that Amazon uses within their teams to motivate individuals and get the best out of them. And as you can imagine, from one of the biggest companies in the whole world, these are some juicy, juicy tips. Also, timestamps are there so you can skip to the parts that you think are most relevant to you. If you're new here, hi, my name's Ash. We talk about all things leadership in this channel, so make sure you hit the subscribe button. And without further ado, let's get into the video.
You've been recently promoted to be the head of EMEA, and that comes with a lot of responsibilities, a lot of teams under you and things like that. But first, tell me, what is the primary difference between heading up a whole region versus heading up a localized region in your mind?
Thank you so much, Ash, for having me. So in my new role, I'm currently responsible for sales strategy for EMEA, for AWS, for Amazon Web Services. Before that, my scope was around the UK and Ireland. So it was actually a new role, essentially trying to think 1+ years down the line, what does our business actually look like? How can we set ourselves up for success, right? To get where we want to get and to innovate on behalf of our customers. When you're embedded in a market or when you're embedded in an area or a country, that specific country will be in a specific stage of growth. So the UK and Ireland will be in a specific stage of growth. Being across the whole of EMEA, it's actually quite interesting because I have, countries like the UK and Germany, but I also have countries like Kenya and Nigeria and Poland and our support for Ukraine. So there's very, very different countries, and also the Middle East. There's very, very different countries that are in varying stages of cloud maturity, which we need to innovate on behalf of our customers for, and what that looks like is very, very different, right? So as a result, the type of work that I do has really expanded in terms of focus, and in terms of coverage and different levels of approaches that we need to take with different types of countries.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess also they will probably come with their own cultural aspect, and the way they think, the way they operate, and the speed at which they operate will probably have a massive difference as well. So what do you think you now have to do to engage differently with the different types of people?
One of the key challenges that I've, not challenges, but just the part of the nature of the new role that I've been reflecting on is, whereas in the UK and Ireland, it's a smaller dedicated area team, it's a lot easier to understand who does what and I had all those connections built, etc. Moving to the EMEA level, we have a lot more cross-functional teams that are relevant to our growth strategy, right? Where we have a lot more dependencies or direct dependencies with our worldwide resources and teams as well. So I think the main point in answer to your question was actually just broadening that set of stakeholders and identifying who they should be in the first place, and building that relationship with them. And sometimes they're in the direct organization of EMEA, and that's in my case a lot easier, right, to influence or to have that report with. The additional challenges come exacerbated, as you can imagine, through org and operating model sort of nuances. So how do you influence without that power of authority, I think, has been a key muscle that I've been trying to develop over the past few months.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. It's something you would normally think about because you have to influence them in a slightly different way as well. And one of the things that we have a lot of people who are newly appointed managers, people who start leading teams for the first time, they find that as a bit of a challenge, I guess. It's like, well, first of all, how do I suddenly start building rapport with all these new people that I had no idea yet that I even needed to interact with, let alone lead? So, what are some good tips that you have picked up in your journey of being an absolute boss and leading many people in high-performing teams that you can share to some of our viewers so that they can put into place themselves?
For sure. I think that's a great question. So yes, leading without authority, whether you have a large team or not, I think is absolutely critical, especially in roles like these, right, in roles and strategy, where your job is to influence decision making, right, and is to steer the organization in a certain way. So regardless of the size of teams, it's an absolutely critical skill to learn, especially when you do start building a team and you do start growing and expanding your remit through influencing and through delegation. That becomes super key as well. What I have learned, or the approach that I have taken, which I think, in part has been successful at least, is to try to deliver value early to your set of stakeholders, right? So that might be some low-hanging fruit sort of piece of work or analysis where you're able to show your value, but where it doesn't mean, in the case of my current role, it doesn't mean that I'm not the strategy person for all our countries and all our areas. I'm the strategy person for EMEA who provides leverage to all our countries and areas, right? And that's sort of how I've been thinking about it. But I've been thinking, okay, how can I deliver that immediate value that will be felt at the area and country level, even though I'm pan-EMEA? So I've been quite choiceful around what I do and what I don't, and what I prioritize and what I don't, to be able to have some form of impact across the board with set of stakeholders. Then that enables me to have a seat at the table and to be brought in proactively in the things that I'm meant to, right, going forward. So that's sort of how I've been approaching it. So you get what you give, sort of thing. And then there's an element of just pure rapport building and relationship building, right? So how can you get other teams that are perhaps whose main job is not to do what you're asking them to do, to actually do something additional over and above their BAU roles for you. And there, I think there's that element of, give and get back, but there's clearly also an element of relationship building, fostering that trust. And it's a bit more of a longer term play. So as an example, because I was in strategy previously, in the UK and Ireland, I already started to make a lot of these connections, which then put me in a good position when I got to the EMEA role to say, actually, this is a great opportunity to get exposure for your team. This is a great opportunity to, get you in front of the area and country leads where you may not have that exposure and opportunity yet. So really helping, it's been a long-term play, or it's not really a play, but a long-term investment in a way, right? In terms of identifying those people, building those relationships, that now, again, it's tying to the get what you give. They're also getting that connection, that proximity with the customer, which perhaps they didn't before.
There's a few different things you said there, which are really cool. Because one of the things that I'm happy that you mentioned is that one of the things I've always said in this channel when we're talking to other people as well is like the best way to win trust as soon as possible is to fix a small problem that already exists as soon as you join a new project or something. Like, because the people who are bosses, whoever, like, they know that problem exists. The team knows that problem exists. You join, you find that problem, you solve it really quickly. Then people are like, oh, cool, like you are part of the team because you have identified the same things we've identified, but you've gone that one step to solve it as soon as you could, which kind of similar thing that you just mentioned there. It's like, oh, how do I get that low-hanging fruit? And then that way it gives you the foot in the door and then the seat at the table to just have wider discussions that you want to. I think that was really cool. And the other one you said was you're choosing what you want to do, which is, I guess now that you're in EMEA league, you have to be like that. Otherwise, you're basically taking on the whole thing and you'll never be able to do anything.
Yes, exactly. It's the sort of thing where, and I think this is a point that I think applies to many roles, which is we're often in an opportunity to actually scope our roles how we want them to be and how we think they should be, even if it's not told to us explicitly. We do have that power. I appreciate that it varies a bit from organization to organization, how rigid they are in their set of roles and responsibilities. At Amazon, one thing that I've been really sort of excited about to date, so I've been at Amazon or AWS specifically for almost 2 years, has been this empowerment, right? So leaders are empowered to spot a problem, go ahead and fix it, right? Even if it's not in my direct remit. Now, the benefit of being in strategy is everything is to a certain extent, right? So I managed to put my fingers in a few pies, but to your point, it's being super, super choiceful. What are those pies that I'm going to absolutely double down on? They're going to be a core part of my role. What are those pies that I'm going to be abreast of and sort of influence from a distance, right? Or keep abreast of, influence from a distance, step in when I need to, but otherwise they're, you know, good to go, carrying on without me, we're good. And what are the balls that I'm going to drop, right? What are the things that I'm consciously not going to do because of resource limitations, because it just doesn't make sense, right? In terms of like strategy is about choices, right? So there's certain, that means that you don't do certain things by definition. And I think often businesses, and this then translates to people, get up lost with and, right? We'll take this on, and we'll take this on, and we'll take this on. Where it should be, we're doing this, moving away from this previously held belief or strategy, right?
Actually, that brings me to a thought that I was just having, is that a lot of managers who become leaders find that quite difficult, what you just explained. Like, one, choosing carefully what they want to do, but two, more importantly, it's they were so used to being the doers. And this isn't necessarily like, you know, low level management, it's like middle to even top, because a lot of time managers are still hands on. So how did you manage to, you know, convince yourself or find the opportunity where you're moving away from the doing to more of the empowering and choosing where you do more and where you do less?
Couple of thoughts there. I think the first one is purely out of necessity, which is, I think, one of the silver linings of the current economic situation that we're in, and especially the impact that that's had, you know, as you've seen in the news, on the tech industry specifically, which is we are forced to be ruthless with our prioritization, right? That's the phrase that we've been using a lot internally, ruthless prioritization. And there's an element of, I as an individual, I actually tend to lean towards ownership. Like, I'll see something, I'll be like, great, let's try to fix it, you know, put my hand up, let's try to do this, right? I am purposefully trying to hold back and just say, no, yes, that's an opportunity. Let's hand this over to person X. Or yes, that's an opportunity, but I'm prioritizing X over Y because of whatever reasons, right? So I'm consciously, given the current environment and my own sanity and sort of mental health at work, I'm consciously trying to exercise that muscle more and more. Now, in terms of actually coming up with a mental model for, okay, what do I prioritize? What do I delegate or just not do? I think there's a few things that I take into consideration. I think it impacts on our customers 100%. So if in strategy, all I'm doing is internal facing work, I'm not doing my job properly. So I'm really trying to get that balance right. There's an element of its importance versus urgency, right? Ultimately, that's the matrix. But how you think about that will be very organizationally dependent. But that's largely how I've been thinking about that prioritization. But then there's also an element of, who do you work with, directly or indirectly, to our earlier point around, you know, influencing other stakeholders, and how can you make sure that you empower them to fill in some of those gaps that you as an individual are not able to, you know, conceivably do, but you know they're important to be done. So as an example, in Amazon, we have this concept of 2 pizza teams. This concept, which is a quite interesting one. So the concept is, in short, a meaty topic that needs to be solved, in theory, should be able to be solved, in theory and in practice, to be honest, should be able to be solved by a group of people, of individuals, who can be fed by 2 pizzas. And the rationale behind that from basically the start of Amazon is that you need agility. You need to be able to move quickly and either fail fast, fantastic, move on, or actually go to market fast. And that's great. And this concept of 2 pizza teams is, you're not reliant on this individual from marketing to approve X, Y, and Z. And you need to get into the product roadmap that is only going to be conceivably released in a year and a half. Or you need finance to do A, B, and C. What it means is everyone who's in that group has the power, authority, and is empowered to make those decisions. So because we have that, there's, in my role as well, there's also certain areas where there's certain topics where we have a single-threaded owner with a 2 pizza team underneath them who are empowered to own those topics. And I'm like, great, you own those. They're very much in that second bucket for me, right? I will influence, I will contribute to, but I will not proactively put my hand up and say, let me drive X, Y, and Z in this topic, right? So I've really been trying to figure out, okay, what's in that first topic that's urgent, important, and has direct impact to our customers? What's in that second topic that I can still stay abreast, but there's a clear single-threaded owner who will take it forward, and maybe I can influence the scope and the priorities. And what's a nice to have, right? Wouldn't it be great if we looked at X, Y, and Z?
Yeah.
Yes, it would, but we just don't. It's just not a priority right now. So that's how I've been approaching
Amazing. I
it.
love that. The two-pizza teams, that's such a cool idea and a cool concept as well. And the other thing is like, it sounds like you position yourself as a bit of a key stakeholder on multiple projects.
Yeah, I think if you think about the
Yeah.
RACI, right, like responsible, accountable, we're both ex consultants. I think we can appreciate a good RACI. It's almost, what are those things that I'm contributing to, and what are the things that I'm informed? But I'm absolutely not responsible or accountable. And being quite forceful, and typically my experience has been these expectations don't even necessarily come from others, they come from yourself, right? Because you say, hey, I should be, wouldn't it be great if, and I think it's actually just being a bit kinder to yourself in establishing those boundaries, and then communicating those clearly. So as an example, I have received emails, including from my manager, by the way, saying, hey, Joanna, for your information, blah, 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 where I've said, fantastic. The person who should be, across this is X, adding them to this notes. And I'm forcing myself to do that more and more because it's true what you were saying earlier. I think it's spot on, right? When you grow up within an organization, you're used to being that person who takes everything that comes to you on. And when you go up within the org, that's just not physically possible. There's not enough hours in a day, plus you're not meant to be working all the hours that there is in a day, right? So you need to be a lot more ruthless in your prioritization.
Did you find that hard? Because I know, for viewers who didn't know, like, we were in the same company together. We unfortunately never had the privilege to work on the same project, but I heard from a lot of people that we were close to that you were a massively high-performing individual and you were acing every single project you were ever in. And, that comes with you doing a lot of stuff, but also you managing really, really well, like your workload and the people you're working with. So did you find it difficult to start letting go of some things?
I do. So it's what I was saying before. As an individual, as a person, I'm fully aware, but at least I think I'm self-aware in that respect. I'm fully aware that I over-index on ownership and what we call in Amazon as well bias for action, right? Fully aware of that. And if you ask anyone, they'll say the same thing.
Hey, listen, I hope you're enjoying this conversation so far. If you like this sort of content and want to get more of it, then consider subscribing to this channel. You will love it. And if you want to ask me any questions or reach out to me directly, then my links are down below in the description. And now let's get back to the content.
However, it's I think what motivates me to push back and continue doing so where it makes sense is literally I have more than enough to get on with without these additional elements that aren't part of my scope anyway. And two, actually to protect my team in a way, right? Because if it comes to me and I can't do it, then I'm going to push down, and then I'm going to continue pushing down things that shouldn't really be part of their remit or that are nice to have. And then I'm not setting the example, and I'm not being able to say, prioritize X over Y. I'm not being able to share that communication consistently. And I think one of the key assets of a good leader is to be able to shelter your team from a lot of the noise that happens around your team, right? And therefore, I've been trying to get better at it, not only for myself, but for my team's general, well-being, essentially, and happiness with work, and their ability to get on with what actually matters, right? What's actually in that first bucket that we discussed.
That's amazing, because one of the things I think pre-pandemic a lot of companies focused on was just pure performance. Like, how can we get the most profits, drive our employees to the maximum level of output that they can put in. But I think post-pandemic, the phrasing, in my opinion at least, has shifted a little bit. It's like, how can we get the max out of people, but in a way that they enjoy giving the max and they are actually happy with their working environment? So like that well-being aspect that you mentioned. And you were always a high performer, so taking on work and kind of doing a really good job at it in a timely manner came easily to you. But that's not necessarily the truth for everybody. So I'm sorry, this is a two-pronged question. One is, how do you check within your team what kind of strengths they have? And the second prong of that same thread is, how do you then motivate your team to give you the best?
There's obviously teams have varying levels of capability, of even fit with a role, and that's absolutely fine. That's expected in any organization, right? I'm actually quite thankful that my team's great. I'm very thankful for them. But that's just a reality of most businesses, right? And something that you, as a leader, and even a leader coming into a new organization, taking over a team, you're kind of just given what you're given, right? And you need to try to get the most out of everyone. The way that I think about it, and sort of again an Amazonian concept that I've borrowed for my own leadership style is empower and inspect in point situations. So what do I mean by that? If someone is willing to go above and beyond and take on a project beginning to end, or they're looking for a stretch opportunity, or it's just part of their key role, to be honest, to lead a specific project. I am not a micromanager in any way, shape, or form, right? So I'll be like, fantastic. I may get involved in the scoping quite a bit, depending on what we're talking about in terms of scope and urgency and who it's going to, and all those kind of things. I might get involved in the scoping quite a bit. But then I'll very much be, go ahead and, let me know when you need my help, sort of thing. Now, that works with certain individuals. It really works with certain individuals. I know if I think back to consulting, that's how I grew. I had people I was working for who deposited that trust in me, and therefore, I was in situations that frankly no 23-year-old should be put.
I know exactly what you mean.
And then later on as well, but anyway, but that pushes you out of your comfort zone, and that forces you to grow in certain aspects, right? So I'm very thankful for that. So that's what I try to do with my team as well. But to your point, that works with certain individuals. It really works with certain individuals. It doesn't with others, and you may be inadvertently setting them up for failure if you don't provide them with that structure and that that detailed support. So there's two things that I do here. It's that inspection element, which is, hey, you go ahead and do this. However, imagine it's a model, or they're building a document with a proposal to present to leadership, right? I'll come in at very point stages and I'll go deep, right? I'll pick a certain assumption that they've used, or depends, right, on what we're talking about. But I'll go deep and I'll see, is this correct? There are glaring mistakes in here. Is there anything that I would add here? And it goes from, or it can go from, this is actually not done correctly, and I actually do need to step in and intervene, and then I'll step in and intervene. Or looks like it's going on track. I just have, some comments here and there. Fantastic. Please continue. Fully empowered to continue without me being involved that much, right? So that's sort of how I think about it. And then what I try to do as well is try to identify those styles of people and capability fits and where they are on their development journey early on when I take on a team, right? Yeah. So, and what I found is, to be honest, people will be quite frank and open typically around their preferences, and you'll see it quite early on as well, right, in terms of how they engage you and when they bring you in, and maybe they're brilliant at doing the analysis, but maybe they're less comfortable in presenting it or positioning a slightly more sensitive point or recommendation with a senior set of stakeholders, which is completely understandable, and that's where I come in. So long answer, but I think the short answer is, I think I try to cater my approach to the actual individual and where they are in their journey and fit against the task that they've been given, right, or job that they're currently trying to solve for. But then the second point is, I then empower but inspect occasionally, and then adapt my style accordingly. I think those are my two key takeaways.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. So you basically assess how they get on, and then based on what you see, you can adapt your leadership style to match that.
Precisely.
Which, obviously is a great leadership mark for you, because that's something I think a lot of people lack right now. So how did you develop that? How did you learn to do that? I know kind of consulting and your background has a lot to do with it, but tell us a little bit more in detail, because I think other people who are probably aspiring to be that sort of a leader will find it useful.
Sure. So the first answer I think that comes to mind, to be honest, is that point that I was saying before around having had those role models, right? So having gone through that experience myself, I know that's what I wanted to feel like to work with me, right? And therefore I try to very consciously do that. And sometimes I find myself getting more involved in something. I'm like, Joanna, why are you doing this? This is, you know, you have delegated this for a reason. Trust, empower, and I do need to hold myself to account sometimes, to be honest. But I really think that the reason why I do it is because I feel it's worked for me, and therefore I want to pass that on and give that opportunity to others as well. It is quite tough to hold yourself to account, and you do need to force yourself to do it. A way of doing it, and I know, you know, when we work together in consulting I think this is easier than perhaps in industry. In consulting, you're working on point projects, right? And you're surrounded by people who are in the same level as you and have a similar types of responsibilities that you have, but on other projects. You can kind of hold each other to account, right? There's sort of that camaraderie sort of feel that I think allows for sort of accountability buddies, right? In terms of, are you actually doing this with your team? And I'm a big believer that how you're doing as a leader really manifests itself by what are people saying about you behind your back, right? In the nicest possible way. But a nicer way of saying that is when you're not in the room, what do people say about you, right? And I think I like to think of that as people writ large, people above me, my customers, my internal customers, but equally the people who work with and for me. How would they describe me as a leader, right? Those role models that I had is what I'm thinking about in terms of what I'd like that description to be. So I really try to hold myself accountable to
That's excellent. I think I really like that, because obviously, like, everything goes top down, even if you don't want it to. Like, there's a lot of research around how you can build a whole team bottom up, but at the end of the day, hierarchy, as humans, we just have an innate need to listen to that for some reason. So, you know, when a leader performs in a certain way, it does set the tone for the rest of the team, right? And the culture follows that.
Sure.
And the fact that you want to promote a high performance culture but not kill your team in the meantime is really good. But how do you prevent people, like, how do you make sure that they're not burning out? And for yourself as well, that you're not burning out, because now that you're expanding your scope quite massively, that's probably a challenge as well, right?
Yeah, no, it definitely is. And that's something that I'm fully aware of as a risk for individuals especially individuals who do take that ownership and who do have that bias for action, right? Because it's what I was saying before, you take on more and more and nothing goes out, right? Out of your plate, which can be a huge challenge. The way that I approach it is I really see it as an ongoing process, right? It requires both commitment from the leader and the team. And it's a topic that I try to approach with the people I work with, and also try to identify and spot those early signs of burnout. And I appreciate those vary a lot by person. But when, you know, you start to feel that individuals are feeling overwhelmed, perhaps going inward a little bit, again, people react differently. I know I'll go very silent when I'm starting to reach my limit. I have been there before, and I know what it feels like. So I try to recognize those in other people. With more junior folks, I think what I found is the main inhibitor, and this ties to another question that you asked earlier on, actually, is many of them haven't learned the skill of saying no, right? And haven't learned that that's fully acceptable and expected. And therefore I try to tell them to say no to me, actually, point number one, but also empower them to say no to other individuals. And I try to lay out that mental model for those 3 buckets that I was saying before, right? I try to say for everything that's in bucket 3, X, Y, and Z topics, you shouldn't be touching it. If you are, push back. If you are and you don't feel comfortable pushing back, bring me in, right? So I try to set those boundaries for them, and I try to create an environment or culture where it's perfectly good and it's perfectly fine and it's expected that you're going to say no to certain things with a very good basis to why you're saying no to certain things, so that you're able to, what you say yes to, you know, do it to the best of your capability and really move the needle where there's opportunity to move the needle. So that's broadly how I've been thinking about it. Now, there's an element of setting the example for your teams, right? Because I think that helps in terms of making sure that your teams do that. It is tough to be, and this is, again, the point that I was mentioning earlier, a lot of these pressures, I feel like individuals put on themselves. So if I stopped work at 6 p.m. every day, would anyone hold me to account that I'm not working hard enough? No, like they would not, right? So to be honest, myself personally, I'm in a bit of a journey, as I was mentioning earlier, around I'm a lot better at saying no. I'm a lot more black and white about things. So I am feeling the improvements in that, but it's on the one hand that's improving. On the other hand, I'm expanding my scope, and therefore what I need to do is expanding at a higher rate, right? So I'm personally still in that journey of getting that balance right, to be perfectly transparent. But what I'm trying to be very conscious to do is not let that impact my team.
And that's a really important point to realize as well, right? Because when there's a period of change, I think people kind of beat themselves up over this quite a lot. It's like, well, I was like this, but now I'm going through a turmoil, but I still expect to be in the same state. It's like you've got to expect your state to kind of change, and then you'll ease off. It's kind of like the Belbing model of teams forming. There's a storming phase in the beginning before you can get into the norming phase. So that's probably where you kind of come into it as well. What are some inspirational thoughts that you have for two types of people? One is somebody who has just newly been appointed manager. They want to become like you, be able to lead a team really well and be a high performer. So what advice do you have for that person? And then on the second, a bit more wider scope is for organizations who want to create a high performance culture like Amazon has done with you as a leader. And a bunch of your colleagues, I'm sure, have a similar kind of attitude and mentality to you. So what are the advice you have for organizations to follow as well? So individuals, organizations.
I'll answer each one in turn. So for individuals, new managers, taking on a new team, expanding scope, whatever it may be, a few thoughts. I think who you hire and how you empower those individuals to do their best work is key, right? And I think there's that element there around learning to delegate and being choiceful around what you do that on versus what you actually keep close to you. That's super clear. And I think those three buckets, if people listening don't have a similar mental model, please adopt a similar mental model, because it's definitely kept me sane in my role this far, and I'd really recommend that. There's also an element of when you then have those people in place, make sure yes, you're empowering them, but if there are areas where you do need to dive deep, they know that they can come to you, and it's expected, and you'll be there to support. And it's not a sign of failure, right? If they come to you, that's the downside of being a leader who's not a micromanager, right? People may feel like they can't come to you or that you won't step in. Making it clear that I will step in if and when it's required, and this is how I will support you. There's an element also then of bringing in the right sponsors for them in the organization, right? Because especially, I think, with consulting where we worked and also in strategy roles, you're across everything, but you're also not tied to a specific team in your day-to-day, and therefore it can be a bit lonely. So making sure that you're connected with the right individuals who are sponsoring you, who are promoting you, again, who are talking things about you when you're not in the room, I think that's absolutely key as well in terms of setting up that team. And then from a people perspective, one thing I mentioned as well is that I think is super important and that I try to correct my biases to do properly is to actively surround myself with people who are going to challenge me. So people who are not like me, people who will say, Joanna, I fundamentally disagree and here's why, right? So again, at Amazon, we have this concept of have backbone, disagree, and commit. It's one of our key leadership principles. What it's saying is, you are meant to have backbone. You are, if you're in a room, in a meeting with someone who's proposing something that you disagree with, it is your responsibility to put your hand up and say, I fundamentally disagree with it, and this is why, right? However, if then the board organization makes a decision to proceed down a certain path, you're expected to disagree and commit. Fair enough, the organization, I've escalated what I had to, I'm now going to disagree and commit with this decision. So the reason I'm bringing this up is I think it's super important to, when you're forming a leadership team, when you're thinking of what sort of profiles of individuals you're going to hire, right? Try to not hire mini-me's who are going to agree with things that you're going to say just by function of who they are and how they behave and their personality type and their background, right? Try consciously to create a bit of that tension, because that's where good thinking really comes from. So that's probably up there in terms of the teaming people aspects of it. Then more broadly for organizations, especially as we think about hiring leaders and how we form leadership teams and all that kind of great stuff. It's especially fueled by the pandemic. We obviously know that there has been a bit of a greater appreciation for the fact that leaders should be all-rounded human beings who yes, have exceedingly high IQ, but also have an exceedingly high EQ, can read a room, understand the people and change management implications of different things being discussed, and be able to make a balanced decision with both sides of their brain, essentially, right? I think that's been a huge. I think it was known before, but I think it's really been fast-tracked and fueled by the pandemic. So I think thinking about who you promote, who you hire, who you elevate to certain leadership positions with these two elements in mind is absolutely key. There's an element also of adopting a growth and continuous learning mindset, especially in an environment where everything's changing, which again, don't want to bang on the drum too much, but in the tech industry, that's very much the flavor of the day right now. You do need to become adaptable, and you do need to learn new things and things that you had no idea about before, right? So that growth mindset, I think, is absolutely key for organizations to instill in their employees. And then finally, foster a culture where you make strategic choices. And by that, I don't mean, have a strategy team that writes, funky PowerPoints. I very much mean choices. We are not going to do this, and instead we are going to do this. This is what I feel many organizations struggle to do. Many strategies are not strategies. There's lists of ands, we're also going to do this, and we're going to expand in X, Y, and Z way. But they don't talk about the trade-offs. And I think, again, especially in this environment, this is a muscle that I think leaders need to develop. And I also think it's a muscle that organizations top down need to transpire to the full org and really empower their leaders to be able to, take on certain paths, perhaps fail, but fail fast. And then make a strategic choice around, whatever area it may be. So I'd probably say from a organizational perspective, it's probably those top three things.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Those were some golden nuggets that you just dropped down there. So that's super useful for anybody who's looking to be a high performer, or any organization who's looking to build high performing teams, right? Because that's effectively, they're able to hire properly and put in the right support and then train effectively, so that you can package nicely these people that are going to influence everything else, because the organization culture is just reflected by the people that they have.
Absolutely. That I completely agree. I think culture and behaviors in businesses are largely a function of people and incentives. Like that's pretty much it. So if you're able to control one, influence the other, ideally, then you're able to really shape your culture and how high performing of a team you end up developing. So I'm a firm believer in that.
Amazing.
For sure.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation. If you did, let me know what your favorite moment was in the comments below. I'd love to see it. By the way, if you know anybody who you think this will be useful for, feel free to share it with them. And if you haven't already, subscribe right here to see more leadership content just like this. And check out this video right here, because YouTube thinks you're gonna love it. And I will catch you in the next one.